Thank you. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Has everyone had an absolutely phenomenal time during the Tulane Book Festival this year? Amazing, amazing. Well, we are going to cap it off with a phenomenal session with these dynamic scientists, writers, journalists. I am so excited to moderate this panel. Who inspires us? Women of influence. We're coming on the heels of International Women's Day on March 8th. So we celebrated that. Come on, hands. International Women's Day. Come on, guys. And we're also coming on the heels of Black History Month. The whole month of February, Black History Month. Yes. So bottom line is, with the stories, the inspirational stories that Nicole and Claire have told, we're going to try to tie all of that in. So let me start off with Nicole. I'm going to say a few words about her. She is just absolutely phenomenal. I met with her for the last 45 minutes. She is an anthropologist, which I find so interesting, received her degree from Columbia University, also received her master's in journalism from Columbia. So Nicole, tell the audience what you want them to know as we go forward with this session today. What should they know about you before we start?
Okay, well, my favorite color is purple. No. So I'm a documentary filmmaker as well. My first film, Blind Date, was about how blind people navigate the dating world when a lot of online dating is visual. I went on to work for CNN and the Washington Post, where I did the Post's first documentary series and first-person documentary series called Should I Freeze My Eggs, about my own journey of navigating turning 30 and how to process that as a single woman. And that was my first self-help by proxy journalistic project, and went on to do many others. I now am at the PBS NewsHour, where I'm the first and only digital anchor for a broadcast show and a correspondent for the show as well. And this book, We Go High, is also self-help by proxy, profiling 30 women of color and how they navigate adversity. So not necessarily a summary of all of their accomplishments, but a journey of how they went from struggle to strategy.
Nicole, thank you so much, and we can't wait to talk about the book. I love the title using Michelle Obama's We Go High, so that's great. Dr. Clare Fieseler, whose PhD, she's a journalist and scientist. I was so excited to read. You received your master's from Duke. You also served as an ocean policy fellow, and you also taught at Georgetown. You've been a fellow at the Smithsonian, and in 2019, you were a mass media fellow at the Washington Post.
We were at the Post at the same time.
Oh, you were at the Post together. So you guys have,
we didn't know each other.
Didn't know each other then. So Claire, tell the audience a little bit about what you want them to know when we talk about your book, No Boundaries, 25 Women Explorers and Scientists Share Adventures, Inspiration, and Advice.
Sure. So I'm kind of a rare beast, I guess. I'm a journalist turned scientist turned journalist. So I've had very much a hybrid career. I started off my career in wildlife documentary filmmaking at National Geographic. While I was there, I made a short Lifetime Achievement video about this very famous female oceanographer, a woman named Sylvia Earle, who grew up on the Jersey Shore, just like I did, going to the Jersey Shore. And she really inspired me, and she kind of inspired me to go back into science. So I left my dream job working at National Geographic, and I got a scholarship to the Duke Marine Lab, and I went on and I studied coral reefs and climate change for almost a decade. Yeah, actually 12 years. But then because I had this background in documentary filmmaking and journalism, I was doing a lot of freelance work and writing for National Geographic. And I made a short film called Outnumbered in Africa about a female African scientist who studied lions. And the short film did really well. And we approached National Geographic and said, we'd love to make this into a series about women scientists and explorers and show kind of how the unique hurdles they face. Because the women that we profiled for the short film, she was traveling on a bus across the entire continent of Africa to see her son, but also do this incredible lion conservation work. And National Geographic came to us and they said, you know, we just stopped doing web series, but this could be a great kids book. And I said, I have no interest in writing a children's book. Then I got pregnant and I went back to them and I said, you know what, I'll write that children's book because now I get it. I totally get that. You know, you can be a serious journalist and scientist and still make really important, valuable content for young readers. And that started a journey that started 3 years ago to make this book, where we profiled 25 women scientists, and going back between science and journalism. But I wanted everyone to know that I didn't want to write this book, and I came to write this book, and it was been such a joy as a parent now. My 4-year-old daughter is here, Remy,
All right.
in the front seat.
Yes.
And I love that she gets to come and see her mom talk to a large audience about something that she's created and done. And it just brings me a lot of joy. So I just wanted to say that briefly.
Well, that's awesome. Well, let me just start off the bat, Claire, right with you. I love the introduction to your book. You and your co-writers say, and I quote, "There's no one path to changing the world and doing what matters." Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, we found so many people who had done incredible things in the field of exploration science that didn't have a background in science. I met a woman who was a 72-year-old retiree that saved a sea turtle. And the people at the sea turtle, veterinaries, were like, here's your sea turtle back. We made it not die. And she's like, well, I don't know what to do with the sea turtle. I just picked it up on the beach. And they're like, well, figure it out. She started a sea turtle hospital. She wrote 20 different scientific publications about sea turtle veterinary science, and opened the largest sea turtle hospital in the South. And she was a school guidance counselor.
Interesting.
And now she's 90 years old and still doing that work. And I just found that so inspiring. And we profile people who have their PhDs and got their PhDs, but we profile a lot of people who have no background in science that contributed to the field of science and exploration because they saw a need. And so that's why I wanted to show people that, if you don't have access to a college education, it shouldn't hold you back.
Well, one of the things I liked about your book, and I love the fact that your 4-year-old daughter is here, you and your co-writer talk about the fact that you wish there had been a book like this when you guys were growing up, because I guess the inspiration for women to become scientists and to go into STEM. So how do you think this book can be used for your daughter and her friends and peers, elementary school women, young ladies?
Yeah, I wrote that in the beginning because I wrote this book for the younger version of myself. It's true, because I didn't have anyone I didn't know any scientists growing up. And when I told my mom, and I was 16 or 17, I was like, I'm really interested in environmental science. And she looked at me, she's like, well, why do you want to be a scientist and stuck in a lab all day? You're so outgoing. You should be a lawyer or a politician.
And enough lawyers.
And
enough
I love my
lawyers
mom.
in the world.
I always say, I don't want to bash my mom because she's been the most supportive person in my career. But even she had this stereotype in her mind of what a scientist is. It's someone who's kind of aloof, stuck in a lab, just into their own thing, not connecting, meeting people in the community, solving real life problems. And so she had to kind of overcome her own, ingrained stereotype. And I was like, well, there's a way that we can start for the next generation to overcome those stereotypes. Yeah.
Okay, well, I love the fact that both of you are scientists, both of you are journalists, but your approach to your writing is obviously different, and the subject matter that you've chosen to focus on is obviously different. So, Nicole, let me turn it to you. One, never met an African-American anthropologist before, so kudos. That is absolutely amazing. And I love that you chose to focus your stories, one, on women of color and how they've inspired you, but some of the things that have impacted them in such a harsh, negative fashion, being women of color, trying to navigate through this world. So tell the audience a little bit, how do you believe your training and education as an anthropologist kind of helped inform you in writing this book and choosing that as the subject matter?
So I started college with my dad's ambition of being an econ major, and took an anthropology course with my college boyfriend, thinking oh, it's a Thursday night, film and culture class, but watch movies and then hang out. And
so it was date night.
Yeah,
You
it was
took the
date
course
night.
for
It was
date
I
night.
took a
Okay.
class for date night, and it ended up changing my life because I really got to learn about not only the world around and beyond me, but forced to have critical conversations about what informs who is telling those stories and how that informs how they are told and how we remember them. And so I quickly pivoted because I had to spend the rest of my college time bouncing back from taking calculus and principle of econ
Right.
my first year, and also also reading Zora Neale Hurston, to be honest. I loved the poetic way she unapologetically navigated both her identity as a Black woman and profiling Black people and canonizing their stories in their own words. And it really shaped my desire to want to not only see a lot of the world and backpack shortly after college, but also be a bit more empathetic and understanding, both of other cultures, but also of really kind of being patient with people who haven't had the opportunity to travel like that, and take that on as a journalist, as a personal responsibility and a personal way to process my own experiences by being a chaperone for other people and for navigating acceptance and understanding and having a healthier relationship with truth. And that truth is hard sometimes.
It is.
And it's really hard for women of color. And I feel like I learned a lot from not only my own experiences, but from other women and women of color's experiences, and wanted to put that together and hopefully help other women not only see themselves in the lived experiences of others, but see a path to realizing their own success and greatness despite those challenges.
I want to focus on your point of who tells the story, because I think that's really important. And I'm going to give you an experience from yesterday, and I want you to respond if you can. Yesterday, we made history where the first female African-American was sworn in to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It was completely historical. And I'm a lawyer, so that's really, really important in my world. And once she was sworn in and we went through the big formal ceremony, she talked about the fact that her father had been a valet and a bellman at the Intercontinental, right on St. Charles, and Poydras, and she ended up becoming a partner at a prestigious New Orleans and Houston law firm directly across the street. So her father's a valet and a bellman at this hotel. She becomes a partner at this prestigious law firm right across the street. So I was talking to one of my friends during the reception, great guy, white, and he said, wow, I never knew that story. I just can't even understand and relate to that. Can you tell the audience a little bit about why who's telling the story maybe matters so much in our understanding of each other and how we interact with each other?
Certainly. I think a big part of it is language, and also, I guess for me, when I think about a story, I'm always thinking about race. When I think about how I want to tell it and how there's that sense of sort of personal responsibility in how you tell that story. And so sometimes, not even sometimes, all the time, like, our lived experiences and contexts inform how we navigate the world and also how we navigate telling stories. And one of the things that I see great value in as a Black woman is that I get to carry that. I get to carry those experiences. I get to carry those hardships, and I get to carry like the context of understanding not only my ancestry, but how that informs my everyday life today into every story and into every edit room, and have tough conversations with people. And that's what's happening at every institution. Sometimes you can walk away feeling defeated and like you weren't heard, but those times that you do feel heard and those times that you do course correct the way a story is presented, that changes how it's absorbed and how the audience absorbs it. And also, like, kind of, it's our jobs. It's not our jobs to pander to you. It's our jobs
Right.
to inform. Right.
And educate.
And context informs that. And so that's where I think, having newsrooms that are global in terms of their representation and in terms of who is telling those stories can be tectonic in the ways that it informs execution and presentation.
Okay, that's phenomenal. I'm going to pivot a little bit, Claire, because your book was so interesting to me. And it's only, I think, 159 pages, but you pack a lot in those 159 pages. Can you tell the audience a little bit, how did you go about selecting the women that you focus on? Because there's such a broad range of what they do, where they are in the world, where they are in their careers. How did you and your co-author go about making that selection? Because it had to be very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, we drafted like a whole. First, we like kind of just asked people like, who would you want to see in this book, and then can you make recommendations, and it started to snowball. And then not everyone wants to tell their story, and you have to be okay with that. We had a couple of people who said no, thank you. They didn't want to put themselves out there. Maybe they thought it would hurt their careers because they're still rising in their careers. They haven't become like a tenured professor at a university. But we also wanted to make sure that we celebrated scientists from diverse parts of the different parts of the world, different ages, different career backgrounds. And we wanted to tackle tough topics, like we tackle in at least 4 of them the topic of motherhood and balancing motherhood and science. We tackle race, and actually 2 of the profiles. We talk about Islamophobia actually in one of the profiles, right. And we needed to make that approachable for an 8-year-old. So how do you do that? That was really tough, frankly. And some of the women knew and wanted to help. There's a woman named Danielle Lee, and she talks about, she's a scientist and she studies mice, field mice and urban mice. So she calls it city mouse and country mouse. So how are field mice in the cornfields of Illinois different from the ones in the city? So she needs to go to people's homes in inner cities and study mice, but then she also needs to go to the cornfields. And she's walking around cornfields in Illinois, and she gets stopped a lot. Who's this black woman walking around my neighbor's cornfields?
Really? She gets stopped? I'm shocked. Really?
And
who knew?
I mean, this is not surprising to me, but it was surprising that she wanted that to be part of a children's book. And she mentions it in the book. And then there are other people who we asked if they wanted to talk about that side, whether it be religion, and they said, I'm not sure I want to. And so we really, every single one of our profiles tackles a different, issue related to women, or women in race, women in culture, and that was really important to us. And so it's not just fun stories. That was important to me. We can talk about the fun nature of making sure that the book is also fun, because in the end, kids just want to have fun. But really, we really wanted to tackle some tough topics in a way that's approachable for an 8 or 10-year-old.
Well, one of the things I like that you did in the book, and I told you this outside, after each section, regardless of whether the person was an anthropologist, archaeologist, whatever, you have these great kind of practical tips or things related to what that scientist actually does. Tell the audience a little bit about that, because I thought that was really cool and interesting. I learned a lot, and I'm 60.
Yeah. And I would actually really love to know, Nicole's, whether you talked about this with your editor at all, but we both profile women, right? But there's also things about that person that the reader wants to know that's not necessarily about their narrative arc, more just kind of cool facts. What's some cool facts about Michelle Obama, And so we did it after each woman's profile in my book, we had a spread about that woman's research, or one's a volcanologist, studies volcanoes. What are the different types of volcanoes? How do you study a volcano? How do you study lava? How does your instrument not melt? And we wanted to make sure that, or my daughter's favorite little interstitial is about this one woman who studies, she's from Sri Lanka, and she studies whales. And the way she studies whales is by looking at their poop, because you can collect their poop and you can tell you all sorts of things about that animal, whether the whale is pregnant, whether the whale is stressed, what the whale had eaten, whether that whale is on her cycle, all these things.
It was a lot.
Yeah, and then to the interstitial, we have her picking up the poop, and the poop is red, so that's an interesting, whale poop is red, who knew? But then we're have these other cool poop facts, and what are things that scientists really learn about poop? And it's my daughter's favorite section, of course.
Mine too.
Yeah, and so the serious journalist side of me is I don't want to write something about badger poop in my book, but the part of me who's a mother is of course they want that.
Right.
Because on top of learning about these very hard challenges and interesting women, they want to learn about badger poop. And, I think you need to understand your reader. And I learned a lot about understanding the reader. Writing for myself, but also trying to write to the reader is tough, especially when that reader is in middle school or something, But
no, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. Nicole, I have to ask you, obviously a lot of the women of color that you feature in the book are famous. So Michelle Obama, obviously that's part of the title. Vice President Kamala Harris. But you also feature a number of women, bluntly, I'd never heard of before, and I consider myself reasonably well-read. And I'm going to ask you the same question too, Claire, about the selection process. You feature Gabrielle Rivera. You feature
Castor Semenya.
Castor Semenya. Tell the audience a little bit about why those women.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Michelle Obama is obvious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Kamala Harris is obvious. Amanda Gorman is obvious. Tell us a little bit about those women.
So for me, a big part of what I wanted was to learn a whole lot on my, like, for myself too. And so I crowdsourced and asked friends, really out of not only personal interest in wanting to kind of cast a broad net, but also with the intention of wanting to be held accountable personally, and for the book to be as intersectional as possible. And so I want to talk about how we define gender, and also kind of bring up the fact that we're still figuring it out, and that's okay. Like, to have.
But tell Castor's story to the
Right.
audience, because I don't know if everyone knows it.
So
It's
Castor
really interesting.
Semenya is a South African runner who continues to break records, and her gender has frequently been called into question, specifically chromosomally, and it's kind of knocked her out of being able to compete, and so it talks. The section kind of talks through that journey and the challenges of that journey, but also of the public eye, and how not only media but like the entire track industry or track and field and sports revolves so much around gender in a way that that can make it really difficult to distinguish and fully appreciate your own identity as a woman, and also like kind of gives other people control over defining that in a way that's not necessarily healthy, and that, you know, we don't probe enough when we are writing the headlines or sharing what other people say and what informs their decisions. And so for Castor, I first learned about her when I was studying abroad in college.
Okay.
And I studied abroad in South Africa and lived in Langa Township outside of Cape Town. And she, you know, she's a hometown hero. And trying to navigate how disruptive womanhood can be is not a friendly process. And trying to navigate how it disrupts your own life is not fun. And so it was really important to me to include her and Gabby, and to look at how we not only see ourselves, but how we navigate how other people see us in a very personal way, and also a way that kind of, like, you know, should encourage us to take a step back and think about whether or not things need to be so binary.
One of the things that came across when you wrote her story, I literally felt her pain as I was reading it. Because as you said, because of the sport she's in, because of what she does for a living, she's been defined by these institutional bodies telling her who she is and who she isn't and who she should be. And I literally felt her pain as I was reading it. So you did a phenomenal job of getting that across. And I want to turn this question really to both of you. You both have these phenomenal backgrounds in journalism. And that's one discipline. I mean, that's one discipline we all study on a regular basis, whether you still read the hard paper or get your news online, or God forbid, watch Fox News, whatever. But bottom line is, you know, journalism is one discipline. But writing, being an author, to me is not quite the same. But since I've never written a book and I'm not a journalist, I'd like to know, how do you see a difference? How did you go from this journalistic standpoint to being an author, or is it kind of part of the same trajectory? And I'll start with Claire.
We interviewed each woman first, as like I would interview anyone in journalism, and then recorded it, and then I personally like transcribed it, and then kind of, you know, wrote it out, and then we worked with a learning educational specialist to bring it down to the reading level of fourth and fifth grade. And so I really approached it like a journalist,
Okay.
frankly. And
Interesting.
and yeah, and like make sure like all the quotes were right there, you know. And we actually pulled quotes in the way like newspapers do in these bubbles to like highlight really important ones. So I very much approached the book journalistically. That just seemed the best way to do it, I think, for kids. I don't know.
So your process was the same.
Yeah, it was. I mean,
Interesting.
more than just like, I guess like we had to think about like, okay, we wrote it out for an adult, and then we're like, okay, what do we need to tweak a little bit for a child to get it? But we didn't dumb it down, you know.
No, you didn't.
So, you know, I very much approached it like a journalist, and I'd love to know whether you.
Yeah, Nicole, did you do the
same
same?
way?
Because I really am
Yeah.
curious about that process.
So I think one important kernel is that it's for both of us, it's our first books.
Yeah.
And they're also they're catalog books. So it's like it's profiles of lots of different people. And I think a big part of the process that both of us talked about before even committing, and I love that you like mentioned that first when you're like, I don't want to write this book. And I was kind of in the same boat at first. And I think a big piece of before you even get to process is like emotional investment.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when I was approached by way of another colleague, by the publisher approached me by way of a colleague to write this book, and it was shortly after George Floyd, and I was kind of cynical about it. I was like, I don't want to write an encyclopedia. Like, I'm not. Why would I want to do that? And for me, the emotional investment piece came in when I thought through how I navigate race and work. And as Kim and I were talking about, like, you know, journalism as a white collar profession is not as diverse as you would think, and is not as diverse generally as white collar jobs. And so it's one of those things where, like, no matter where you are, you're going to bump up against race. And for me, navigating that was like, I went through a whole slave novel phase, and then I was like reading other nonfiction by women of color, and I learned so much from them that when I took a step back and stopped getting in my own way, I realized that it was an opportunity to continue to do that and do that for other people as well. So the process, I'd say, definitely journalistic in the same sense of like a whole lot of research and a whole lot of fact checking,
Okay.
but also a whole lot of chaos because I've never written a book before. So it took a while to like wrap. And I also started my first love is video making.
Okay.
And so I, obviously when you go to journalism school, you got to do it all. You got to write too. And most things live in a written piece, no matter where they live online. And so, so I came in with that experience, but wrapping my head around that many pages of writing and that many words
was a little different.
It was a hurdle. And so for me, it took developing those muscles. And so I kind of like, I skipped around a lot in terms of the research piece and in terms of like which profiles, like I worked on a few at a time,
Right.
because it also meant that like I got to read a whole bunch of their books. And sometimes I just needed to switch, right? Like getting in the weeds on Castor can be a little tough. Sometimes you want to like switch Stacey Abrams and like, listen,
Something empowering. Right.
Empowering and like, take breaks by working on like other things at the same time. So for me, the process was very journalistic and messy at the same time.
I think that's great. Claire,
But-
go ahead and add to that.
Well, we were talking last night because we met at a reception last night for the book festival, and we were just talking about how similar our journeys were in that these are both first time reading books. We're both journalists, and how like when you make something in journalism, it goes out into the world, but then it kind of flutters away. It's permanently there, but it's nothing really like a book that sits on a library. And I can go into any public library in my city, and the book is there. My book is there, and I get way more when I get just hate mail for my journalism because I write about climate change. And a lot of people have opinions about that.
Really?
A lot of men write me emails. I should say that. But you know, I get so much more positive, you know, emails from girls who read my book who are just learning how to learn how to use email because they're like 10 or 12 or 11, you know, 11, and they're writing. They find my, you know, you can find my email address online, and they'll write me an email, and it might be the first time they've ever written an author. You know, I've got parents that write me as well, but I've had kids write me in response to my book, and it reminds you of the, you know, I've thought about this a lot when we were editing the book, because I think editing was a lot different than writing. Was like, this is gonna last forever, you know, well,
Right.
not forever, but this is gonna be out there with my name on it for a long time, and in people's minds it's current, even if it's 7 years ago. And it's, you know, I wrote the book 3 years ago, actually, even though it came out last year. And that permanence and the way people respond to it is very different than journalism, even if I had the same type of profile approach. And so we were talking last night how, like, you know, the product is so different and the way the feedback is so different. And for my next book, I think I'll approach it a little bit differently because of that knowledge that I have now of the way it lives in the world. And I think, like, first-time authors, it's maybe it just strikes all of us the way that lives in a different form in the world than journalism. You know, I've written, you know, 100 articles, you know, but it's the book is different. It's received differently in this world and treated differently in this world, and so that will affect my next like the next book.
Well, it's funny that you talk about permanence. Some of us in the room were at the session with Mark Morial and Darren Walker and Savitri yesterday, and Mark Morial talked about reading 25 newspapers every day, and he says he literally just pulls out the articles that are important and he throws the rest of the paper immediately away. So it's a whole different thought process as it relates to what we're reading from a journalistic standpoint versus what we're reading, like you said, the permanency of books. But I don't want to lose this question of race, Nicole, because you and I talked about this a little bit when we were meeting before. Many of you in the room were also at Nicole Hannah-Jones' presentation, and you focused on her in your book. And there were two quotes I found striking, so I want you to just kind of address these in the audience. One, on page 153, you said, as she researched, meaning Ms. Hannah-Jones, she noticed a pattern. White students were being educated for democracy, and Black students were being educated for oppression. That's one quote. The second quote was, the burden of working for racial justice is laid on the very people bearing the brunt of the injustice and not the powerful people who maintain it. I say to you, I refuse. Tell me how that impacted you when you spoke with her about that. And how does that impact you now and inform you as we continue to grapple with this hard issue of race in America?
I think the truth is, like, race is not going anywhere. And, like, we're also really struggling to have honest conversations about it. I think that in journalism, sometimes we don't factor that in enough and don't have those hard conversations. And like I was telling you earlier, you know, after Black History Month and during it, one of my like instincts for friends was like, check on your Black journalism friends, because they're over here course correcting in every possible story. And it is a burden that no one volunteers for, and that you're not getting paid anymore for. And so for me, I think those quotes really resonate because I'm tired too. And like, I feel like naps and like rest should be a part of how you navigate those burdens, and that they're not going anywhere. And that you know, speaking up about them is also a form of self-preservation. And for me, like that's where I'm at, I guess. Like at this intersection of life is, you know, fight the good fight, but also like take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself.
Because that's
self-care.
a big part of, you know, it's like it's not your job to like further weather your body and further exhaust yourself by educating and teaching others. It's not necessarily a responsibility. And I feel like another important element is taking advantage of the opportunity to do like to just deal with that information yourself, like to navigate it, to process it, and to not necessarily be afraid to just live with it. Like people of color live with how race informs a lot of their lives every day. And so like the living with it part is okay. Like it's all right. We're all doing it.
Claire, can you address that from a gender standpoint? Because the whole purpose of this panel, we're talking about women who inspire us. So from a gender standpoint, how would you respond or supplement what Nicole just said?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I don't know what it's like to be a Black woman in America, but I know what it's like to be a woman in America. And I can only say that it's very enraging that, that people men who want to read my book, they're like, well, I want to get this for my daughter. And I'm just like, you should not care about this topic only because you have a daughter.
Right.
You should care about this topic because you agree that we should have just as many women engineers in the academy as we do men, and we're not doing well at all in that. So I think it gets frustrating when I wrote this book because I approached National Geographic in 2015 and I said, I've read through your magazines for the year and you only are writing about women 19% of the time. Can you let me write some articles in the magazine about women? And they said, that's interesting. And then they said, why don't you present to us the numbers that you just talked about? So I wanted to do like a whole presentation, like, oh, wow, so we should do better on our representation of women. I said, yeah. And they said, thank you. And I walked out the door and I approached the video team and I was like, well, can we make a series? And they said, here's some money, let's go do it. And then I came back and the video folks were like, this is really something for kids' books. And we're like, okay. So we just kept on having doors slammed in us that they thought that their topic wasn't important enough. But then when we're like, we need to educate the next generation about this, then people were like, okay, we'll do that. And I think for me, I just didn't you can be discouraged, I think, and I don't know whether you've had a similar experience where you just have to push through and not get discouraged that people don't want to take your proposal or your pitch seriously, and they just say, that's interesting. Yeah. Or, we don't know if we have the budget for that right now, until you find someone who finally says yes, and just to not get discouraged, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, that is the point of We Go High. It's like, yeah, like the live with it part is important, but it doesn't, like that shouldn't paralyze you. And like, I've been paralyzed before because like the stress and like the pain of like rejection can be really hard. And like reading other women's books is kind of like what helped me get over that hurdle. And so that's kind of the goal of it. But also, what I love about your story is like, it is a testament to like shoot your shot, right? Like shoot your shot. Right. And if one place or person says no, like if like as journalists, our currency is our ideas. Like just because someone, like one entity doesn't think you or your story or your idea isn't the right fit, like somebody else will, or like you might be able to publish it yourself.
Say,
like,
do it yourself.
Like you could still do it,
which a lot of people are doing.
Yeah,
do it
and
yourself.
So it's kind of like looking at it like a pinball machine, right? Like the ball, like you might hit one thing and like it'll bounce back at you, but then you like kind of, there's like, you can get around it, right? And so I think that's the beauty of our resilience as women. And I think that it's an opportunity and an invitation, like dealing with adversity and also talking through things like whale poop mean that, that the light at the end of the tunnel is something that is yours and yours alone. And you can use other people's experiences to inform how you get there.
Nicole, that's a great segue because this is going to be my last question so we can take questions from the audience. But what's next for both of you? Claire, what's next?
Well, I just wanted to say, to tag on, before I answer that question, very quickly. What I love about what you did, Nicole, is that like you had already been reporting about race, right? And someone came to you and was like, we want you to do this in another form. And you have this privilege as a reporter at these well-known institutions, and you took that and you said yes. And you know, it's no secret that like we get these opportunities because we have these big institutions behind our name, National Geographic, Washington Post, you know, but you have the privilege in recognizing that you can take that and do something good with it. And you did. And I feel like saying yes at the right time to use kind of the momentum of your career to do something new, like write a book, is like important, because not everyone does. So I just want to say that. As far as me, we actually were
What you got?
Running a book for adults. I don't want to talk about that right now, but I'm talking with National Geographic about doing another children's book about concrete ways for children to basically, you know, save the world, address the planetary crisis right now, because I think a lot of young kids are very stressed and unsure about what's happening to our planet. And so we're going through right now some ideas about, you know, books like, you know, how to save an ocean, how to save a river, how to save a forest, like with really concrete solutions, what has worked in the past with communities, for individuals, for governments, to help kind of, you know, give young people the tools to kind of go forward, because I think that's really the next step.
I love it.
Yeah.
Nicole, what's next? What you got?
Well, I have to tack on to Claire again one more time. So I love that she mentioned privilege, because I think we don't talk about that enough and like reframe it, because I don't think privilege is a bad thing. I think it's something that's really important to be self-aware about and to occupy. And it's not necessarily about like having it; it's about what you do with it. And in terms of what's next, I'm still figuring it out. I have lots of ideas, lots of percolating projects. I'm a side hustle queen. I just like, I love working on lots of different things. So I have a book club. And so I think I
And how do we join? How do we join?
It's at bookclub.com, but they're actually like rearranging things now.
Okay.
But I do want to build on that because Koa Beck, who's in my book, I worked with her. Her book is one of the books. White Feminism is one of the books. I got to talk to her through navigating her book, and that informed me including her in one of the profiles. And so I want to continue on this journey of helping us all process the information we're receiving, and the process of like re-educating ourselves as adults, because we didn't necessarily learn it when we were kids. And for us, and inviting us to kind of like approach it with like a more kid-like innocence. So that I'm
still working through
I'm figuring it out.
I love
Probably a couple more documentaries.
I love
TBD.
it. We have time for a couple of questions. You've got to have some questions with these two phenomenal authors. Anybody? Nope. Yes, thank you. Your name?
There's a microphone right there. Go to the microphone.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is that any better? Okay, Paige
Little bit.
Morrison. It seems like your books are about individuals and about their success stories and how they approached a passion and targeted that passion and kind of followed it to an inspirational point. Did you see support? Like, did you see women supporting women, or structures that they utilize that you know, we as people out here who see people like you writing a book about successful women could be supportive and inspirational in a way?
Certainly. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So my book is intended to be just that.
I'm sorry?
Okay. So the question was,
Can you repeat it?
did we come across in writing our books, women supporting women, and how that fits into this? For We Go High, that's kind of the point of it a little bit. Like it's intended to be, it's intended to be self-help by proxy, meaning like this woman's journey or these women's journeys are how they navigated getting to some of those places. So I have said it several times, but cannot pronounce her last name. But Arundhati, last name starts with a B. In my book, she was the first woman to run the International Bank of India.
Right.
And so it basically talks through like how she got other women in the room, but also like how when she was the only woman in the room, she continually had to check people, continually had to navigate being not included on emails or different parts of her process that like informed her resilience. But a part of how like we're able to be so resilient is by surrounding ourselves by other women, by confidants, by support systems. And so the self-help by proxy element does include the journeys of women and how other women inform their ability to keep going.
Claire, do you want to add to that? We are running out of time,
Well,
but I
yeah.
want to make sure we answer.
Two of our profiles focus around female friendship. And I think that's a very it's not always about role models. It's about female friendship, friends supporting each other. And we try to profile that. One other thing is we asked every single woman, what was this book that inspired you as a kid? And people love that question because they'll talk forever about, these books or Ranger Rick or something. And we try to include that in every single profile so that kids can go and get those books, because books really can be supportive to young people because they open their minds. And
Supportive and transformative.
Yeah, and transformative. And so we made sure to, because there are plenty of women who did kind of, pull themselves up.
Right.
But they all had a book. They all had a book that inspired them as a kid. And I thought that was just something to remind young people about and ourselves about.
That's great. Okay, one more question. Anybody else have a quick question? Yes, ma'am. Can you say your name?
My name is Katie.
Hi, Katie.
I'm a student here, and I study biology and then also documentary filmmaking.
Oh.
So
Impressive.
I'm really curious about your experience being a woman in both of those fields. And I know that, like, at least in my experience, science can be very competitive. And both of those are obviously more male-dominated fields. You already kind of touched on that. I'm kind of curious about how that has been being in both and seeing that from both sides.
Thank you, Katie. That's a great question. Claire?
From science side of things, I definitely had really gross men say gross things to me when I was coming up, especially as a grad student. I was studying coral reefs and climate change, so I was in a bathing suit and I was diving, and other men, were 20 years older than me on these trips would say things. And at the time, I would just laugh it off. And now looking back, I was like,
Right.
I was 25 years old at the time. Like, what was happening? So it's still there. It's still there, unfortunately. And the thing I wish I did at the time was call it out, like right there on the boat when it happened. And I think that's like the best you can do as far as like in science, like especially if you in the classroom or whatever, just call it out. And I wish I had done that when I was your age.
I think my advice would be to start getting comfortable and practicing saying no. Like,
Yes.
just let it come out. Just you can say it in the mirror. Just no. And like
Yes.
that will make it.
Yes.
I'm going to do that tonight, I think.
And I think that it helps allow, like it can help you reframe and remember that like you are in control, like you are in the driver's seat, and you don't have to be a passenger. You bring just as much to the table as like your professors do.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it took me a while to realize that in college. But to this day, like I still treat every job like a college campus in the sense of like somebody's door might not be open, but I'm gonna send them an email because I know the ending of it. So, shoot your shots, but also like you're valuable, and like don't lose sight of that and practice saying no.
And we have one of the top labor and employment lawyers, Monique Doucette, who definitely buys into just say no. Guys, these two authors have been phenomenal. So can we have a round of applause for Nicole Ellis, Dr. Clare Fieseler? Thank you all for being here. This has been so much fun for me. Please go down to the bookstore and buy these two books. I've read them both and they are amazing. Thank you guys for being here.
Right after